There's a kind of silence that no one notices, but that hurts you as if every sound in the world were a blow. And maybe you've never told anyone this, but there's a deep, ancient, almost ancestral reason why your mind reacts to parties and crowds, as if you were born in another era, as if you were an emotional survivor of 1970, when feeling too much was considered weakness, and talking about what bothered you was a forbidden luxury. The question is, why does your mind work like this? Perhaps you've already noticed that there's something about you that never fits into noisy environments, shallow conversations, or gatherings full of people who always seem to be playing roles that don't make sense to you. It's not that you hate parties. You hate what they do to your mind. And if you've gotten this far, you probably already know that this isn't just personality. It's a psychological mechanism you developed long before you realized you were protecting yourself from the world. Many people who prefer silence grow up hearing that they are strange, antisocial, shy, difficult. But what if that's not the truth? What if, deep down, you've developed such a sharp, sensitive emotional awareness that the modern world simply doesn't suit it? Imagine growing up in a home where expressing feelings was frowned upon, where there was no space to talk about what you felt, where being introspective was treated as a flaw that needed correcting. Now imagine that this wound never healed. It only rearranged itself. It created a mind that functions like the minds of the silent people of past decades, those who were forced to swallow emotions, to disguise vulnerabilities, to feign stability. This explains why you feel out of place in environments where everyone seems comfortable. Your mind wasn't shaped for that kind of stimulus. It learned to survive in silence, not in noise. That's why, when you enter a party, something strange happens. It has nothing to do with the music, the number of people, or the type of atmosphere. It has to do with the feeling of emotional invasion. In a few minutes, your brain starts absorbing everything. People's tone of voice, hidden intentions, the tension in the air, expressions that no one else notices but you do. And while others are having fun, you become exhausted. But not ordinary tiredness. It's psychological exhaustion, as if you were carrying the emotional weight of the entire environment. This is the kind of sensitivity that people in the 1970s learned to hide, because back then there was no language for it. And you somehow inherited this silent emotional code. But what really bothers you isn't the party. It's the feeling that you need to perform a version of yourself that doesn't exist, as if you were wearing a tight, uncomfortable emotional outfit that wasn't made for you. And the more you try to adapt, the more you realize it doesn't make sense. Because you weren't born to survive in the noise. You were born to perceive what the noise hides. And that makes you different. Perhaps you've already asked yourself, why can't I be like everyone else? Why does everyone seem to enjoy these things? The answer is simpler than it seems. You feel more deeply, interpret more quickly, and absorb more intensely. And that's not a flaw. It's survival. People like you see emotional nuances that most ignore. And that puts you in a psychological place where the party is never just a party. It becomes analysis, vigilance, discomfort, an excess of stimuli. And no mind with that sensitivity can withstand that without paying a price. And this characteristic doesn't appear out of nowhere. It usually arises from environments where you had to grow up too fast, learn to observe yourself, create your own internal responses, because no one taught you how to deal with what you were feeling. Children who grow up like this tend to become adults with a protected, quiet psyche, averse to unnecessary noise, not because they hate people, but because their emotional system was designed to conserve energy, not waste it. If you feel you carry a kind of old-fashioned, almost outdated emotional maturity, it's because your mind learned to defend itself from chaos long before you understood that this was protection. And now, in every social situation, it reacts as if it were still in the past, reliving patterns you don't even remember when they started. Your mind isn't from 1970, but the way it protects itself is. And this is where the reflection begins. Because, if you recognize all of this in yourself, perhaps you need to ask yourself a question. Why do I still blame myself for being this way? Why do I keep trying to fit my silence into environments that weren't made for it? This guilt isn't yours. It was taught, internalized, repeated, but it doesn't belong to you. The truth is, people who prefer silence aren't running away from life. They're simply choosing a type of existence where they can truly breathe, where their thoughts aren't interrupted by expectations, where their boundaries aren't crossed without permission, where their sensitivity isn't seen as excessive, And if that makes you different, then different is exactly what you should be. You're not wrong for not liking parties. You're not broken because you can't stand crowds. You're not damaged because noise hurts you. You simply possess a finely tuned emotional system, and all true sensitivity comes at a price. The modern world wasn't made for deep people, but deep people also weren't made to get lost in the noise. You are here now, listening to these words, because on some level you feel there is something within you that no one has ever explained. And perhaps it is now that your story finally begins to make sense. Have you ever noticed that there's a silent pattern inside you? A pattern that makes the world seem too fast, too noisy, too superficial. And perhaps, for a long time, you've tried to ignore it. You tried to adapt, tried to fit in, tried to convince yourself that everyone is like that, and that you just needed to relax. But the more you pushed yourself into the world, the more distant from yourself you felt. As if every party, every meeting, every social setting turned on an uncomfortable light that revealed what you always preferred to keep hidden, how out of place you feel. And it is in this feeling that the truth resides, because people who feel like you don't disconnect from the world for lack of effort. They disconnect because they have been taught throughout their lives to be silent, to observe, to adjust emotionally before anyone else. And this has created a kind of psychological maturity that no one sees, but that you carry with you every day, in every detail, in every silent decision you make. If you feel like you function like someone from another era, it's not because you were born in the wrong time. It's because you learned to live in survival mode, a silent, controlled, attentive mode. People like that don't throw themselves into things easily. They don't trust quickly. They don't surrender to noise because noise has always meant danger. It's almost as if your mind has programmed a constant reminder. Observe first, feel first, analyze first. And while this protects you, it also keeps you away from environments where most people enter without thinking. Perhaps you grew up hearing phrases like, "You overthink," "You need to let go," "You have to enjoy life." The problem is that no one ever asked why your body freezes, why your mind wanders, why your silence weighs so heavily. People want you to fit in, but they never want to understand what shaped you. And that's why your sensitivity isn't understood. It's judged. And you ended up learning to hide, to disguise, to smile when you want to leave, to stay when you're already tired, to be normal when everything inside you begs for silence. But there's a point in this process that almost no one talks about. How you feel in social settings isn't about shyness. It's about emotional memory. Your body learned to respond before you understood. It reacts to what seems invasive. It rejects what sounds fake. It shies away from what seems superficial. And this has a profound logic. Sensitive and introverted people don't tolerate environments where emotions are swept under the rug. They notice everything. And noticing everything is exhausting. If you're like this, then perhaps you're living with an emotional exhaustion you can't name. It's not physical tiredness. It's the feeling of carrying an inner world that no one sees, while trying to survive in an external world that has never welcomed you. And this has made you develop a type of mind that operates in silence. A heavy, deep, protective silence. A silence that many mistake for coldness, but which in fact holds your truest sensitivity. And it is here, exactly at this point, that I want to ask you something important. If any part of this script makes sense to you, leave a comment now saying just that. Yes, that makes sense. That's how I understand that I'm reaching you, that I'm talking to someone who truly feels what I'm describing. Your comment isn't about algorithms. It's about connection, about knowing that there's someone on the other side who finally feels seen. Now that you've caught your breath, let's get back to what matters. Your mind, that mind that many say is closed or exaggerated, actually functions like an emotional radar. It perceives misalignments, inconsistencies, hidden intentions, and this makes you feel uncomfortable in environments where no one is truly present. Parties for you are like emotional theaters. Everyone playing roles, smiling out of obligation, conversing according to a script. And that doesn't align with the kind of emotional truth you carry. People like you have a different kind of relationship with depth. You don't tolerate falsehood. You can't stand superficiality. You don't know how to feign interest in something that doesn't awaken anything in you. And this, in a world where everyone pretends everything, ends up making you a rare presence. Intense, whole, but also lonely. And that's why you feel so out of place in environments that others call fun. Because for you, having fun is something else entirely. It's being with someone who understands you without the noise. It's talking while looking into each other's eyes. It's feeling that there's truth in the exchange. It's being able to exist without having to explain who you are all the time. In the modern world, that's almost an emotional luxury, and perhaps you carry a feeling of belonging to the past, precisely because the way you feel doesn't match the haste of others. You think before you react. You feel before you speak. You observe before you decide. This gives you depth, but it takes away your lightness. And this exchange is unfair, because today's world rewards those who speak loudly, those who show off too much, those who throw themselves in without fear. But you operate on the opposite logic. You only get close when you feel safe. And for you, safety isn't measured by the number of people around you. It's measured by their emotional quality. And this selectivity, which many call coldness, is actually just protection. You don't open up to just anyone because you've learned that opening up hurts. You don't seek out crowds because crowds are confusing. You don't like parties because parties are settings where you lose the emotional control that you worked so hard to build. And losing that control terrifies you. But now perhaps you're beginning to realize something. There's nothing wrong with you. Nothing. It's just that the world has never been sensitive enough to understand you. And that's why you've been closing yourself off, molding yourself, hiding yourself. Not because you wanted to, but because you needed to. There comes a point in life when you finally realize that it's not the world that's running too fast. It's you who has learned to slow down so as not to stumble over your emotions. And when that awareness arrives, it changes everything. Because for the first time you realize that the way you feel wasn't born yesterday. It was built, brick by brick, emotion by emotion. Nothing that you are today arose from nothing. Every detail, every limit, every silent escape, every social discomfort has a much deeper origin than you imagine. And perhaps that's why you seem like someone from another era. Because unlike many, you weren't shaped by the urgency of the surface, but by the density of experiences. Your emotional maturity didn't happen because you lived a lot. It happened because you felt too much. And feeling too much in a world that feels too little has always put you at a disadvantage, but it has also made you rare. Have you ever noticed how certain situations that seem simple to other people appear emotionally complex to you? An unexpected phone call, a last-minute invitation, music that's too loud, someone who talks non-stop. For many, this is everyday life. For you, it's overstimulation. Not because you're fragile, but because your nervous system functions like a sensitive radar that picks up nuances no one else notices. People like that don't become introverted by choice. They become so because their bodies demand silence to reorganize themselves. Their brains need time, pause, distance, not to escape, but to process. And if you've lived in environments where no one gave you time, you've learned to create it yourself, sometimes abruptly, sometimes silently, almost always in solitude. And this is where the question that almost no one asks themselves comes in. What happened to you to make the world seem so noisy? Were you born this way? Or did you learn it this way? If you look honestly, you'll realize the answer lies in the accumulation of experiences. Perhaps it was living with unpredictable people. Perhaps an emotionally unstable home. Perhaps the constant feeling of needing to anticipate behaviors to protect oneself. People who become overly sensitive rarely do so in safe environments. They become sensitive because they had to survive emotionally very early on, and that made you develop a strategic mind, a mind that observes micro-expressions, that detects hidden intentions, that prepares for scenarios that haven't even begun. That's not paranoia. It's adaptation, and profound adaptations don't disappear overnight. Therefore, when you enter chaotic environments, your mind activates an ancient mechanism. Stay alert. And this constant alertness is exhausting. That's why, after interacting with many people, you feel as if your energy has been drained. It's not just being fussy. It's a real emotionally heavy process that no one sees because you learn to disguise it from an early age. And that same ability that protected you also makes you seem like someone from another decade. Old-fashioned in the way you feel, the way you observe, the way you exist. While the world rushes by, you analyze. While the world shouts, you listen. While the world shows off, you protect yourself. And it's this difference that makes you feel disconnected. But there is something even deeper. When you avoid parties, crowds, or noisy environments, it's not just about the external noise, it's about the internal noise they create. Places like that put you on high alert. Too many people, too much conversation, too much energy. All of this saturates an emotional system that's already operating at maximum capacity. And while others are having fun, you're processing micro-gestures, vibrations, incongruities. You notice when someone is uncomfortable, even when smiling. You notice when a conversation is empty, even when full of words. You notice when the atmosphere changes, even if no one admits it. Your perception doesn't leave you in peace. It never shuts off. And this heightened awareness can be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it gives you depth. On the other, it robs you of lightness. On one hand, it makes you empathetic. On the other, it leaves you exhausted. On one hand, it connects you with people's truth. On the other, it pushes you away from them before they realize who you are. But look, none of this is a defect. None of this is a flaw. None of this makes you wrong. It just makes you complex. And complex people in this world always seem out of place. When you feel like your mind works like someone from the 70s, you're actually recognizing your detachment from modern immediacy. In the 70s, the world was slower. Relationships were more face-to-face. Emotions had space. Conversations had pauses. And you, with your analog mind in a digital world, end up feeling like an emotional stranger. But it's not nostalgia. It's consistency. You function best when you can breathe, when you can feel slowly, when you can observe without pressure, when you can exist without being pushed into superficial interactions. Your body knows this. Your mind knows this. You're the one who still tries to deny it. Perhaps that's why you distance yourself, even without realizing it. Perhaps that's why you refuse invitations that seem normal to others, because what's normal for them is uncomfortable for you, because their pace offends you, because their energy tires you. And this generates guilt, a guilt that consumes you from the inside as if you were failing people. But here's the truth you finally need to hear. You're not failing anyone. You're just trying to survive emotionally. And nobody should be blamed for taking care of themselves. And when you look at yourself this way, with more kindness, more understanding, more maturity, you realize that it was never the party itself that bothered you. It was the emotional atmosphere it created. The chaos, the intensity, the lack of authenticity. You always sought depth, and depth is not found in noisy environments. There comes a moment in the life of someone who feels deeply when everything finally falls into place. A silent, almost imperceptible moment, where you realize that it's not your fragility that makes you different, but your ability to perceive what most people can't. After so many years trying to adjust, trying to fit in, trying to seem lighter, more social, more normal, the time comes when you look at yourself honestly and understand what you are doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be understood. And perhaps no one has ever explained this to you. Perhaps you've spent your life believing the problem lay in your silence, your depth, your introspection, your preference for quiet environments, your aversion to excess. But now that you've walked this entire path, it's impossible not to see what has always been right in front of you. The world is too noisy for a mind like yours, and that doesn't make you inadequate. It makes you rare. People like you are built in layers. Layers of observation, analysis, intuition, sensitivity, caution. Layers that weren't born for the accelerated pace of today. Your mind operates with density, while most operate with speed. And when depth meets superficiality, incompatibility is natural. You don't act slowly. You act consciously. You don't avoid people. You select energy. You don't run away from environments. You preserve your emotional balance. You don't hate parties. You just don't find life in them. And this is the part that nobody understands. For you, connection is something sacred. It's not entertainment. It's not a pastime. It's not a distraction. Connection, for your mind, is true presence. It's real exchange. It's feeling that there's a conversation that breathes, that has meaning, that has safe silence. The modern world doesn't offer you that. The modern world offers you stimuli. And excessive stimuli for someone who already feels too much is like trying to breathe inside a hurricane. That's why your mind seems to belong to another era, because in many ways it does. A mind that values calm wasn't born to live surrounded by urgency. A mind that notices details wasn't born to live surrounded by noise. A mind that feels deeply wasn't born to function under constant pressure. And the guilt you carry for being this way is precisely proof that you've spent too long trying to fit into something that was never meant for you. And the most ironic thing is that, while you question yourself, try to adapt, and force yourself to fit in, the people who would truly know you never get close, because you're too busy trying to meet the world's expectations, not your own. It's like wearing tight clothes every day hoping that one day they'll fit. They never will. And not because you're wrong, but because the clothes weren't made for your emotional body. The next step is simple, yet profound. You need to stop fighting against your nature. You need to understand that the world doesn't need to mold you. You need to mold the world around you. You need to build spaces where your mind can breathe. You need to accept that you need silence, and that this silence doesn't isolate you, it organizes you. You need to understand that you're not antisocial, you're selective, that you're not strange, you're sensitive, that you're not cold, you're cautious, and that there is much beauty, much strength, and much authenticity in this way of being. If you could see your own mind from the outside, you would realize that it has nothing old about it. It has something that is increasingly rare, emotional depth, and depth scares those who are used to shallowness. But it is precisely this depth that makes you realize what many don't see: who is worth your time, who is worth your energy, who is worth your presence. You don't give yourself easily because your commitment is not small, and everything that is great requires care. And perhaps the great turning point you needed is happening right now, at this very moment, as you listen to these words. A silent, intimate, discreet turning point. The turning point where you finally understand that you don't need to change your essence. You need to protect it. You need to use it intelligently instead of seeing it as a weakness. Your sensitivity is not a burden. It's a compass. It's what keeps you away from environments that hurt you. It's what brings you closer to people who make you feel good. It's what pushes you inward when the world is too aggressive. It's what shows you who you are. And if you've made it this far, if you've listened to every word of this journey, if you've recognized yourself in every detail, then you already have enough awareness to take the next step, to live according to who you truly are, not according to what others expect of you. Now we've reached the end of the script, and here's exactly what you asked for. If you've watched this video this far, leave a comment with the word 1970. I'll know that you listened to everything, that you walked with me to the end, and that you allowed yourself to feel what needed to be felt. And also write, what city are you watching from? I want to know how far this reflection has gone. It is clear. Subscribe to the channel, not just for support, but because here you will always find silence, depth, and truth. And when you're finished, also watch the recommended videos on the end screen. They continue the conversation we started today.